lot of developments now taking place in Bangladesh after the ousting of Sheikh Hasina and a new interim government in place to ensure free and fair elections, but also to get law and order in to have a proper law and order situation in the country. But what are we seeing over here is one, that the Jamaat-e-Islami, which was banned, that ban has been lifted. Many say it could be for political reasons, but there are other developments too. Pro-Al-Qaeda chief Jashimuddin Rahmani, known to be or declared a terrorist by many, with a huge focus on anti-India activities, has also been released. But what does this mean for India? What does it mean for the world? And certainly, what does it mean for Bangladesh? To discuss all this and more, I'm being joined by Clifford Smith, a scholar, a very strong Bangladesh hand, has been looking into what's happening in Bangladesh. Clifford, thank you so much for joining us here on India Today Global.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Let's just begin with what's happening on the ground in Bangladesh. We are looking at a situation where they are yet to contain the law and order situation and bring in normalcy back into the country. What's your reading of what's happening on the ground with vis-a-vis the interim government that's in place, the BNP, and then we're looking at a lift of the ban on Jamaat-e-Islami?
Yeah. I want to preface by saying, I have not been on the ground, so I'm saying this as an outsider, sort of reading reports the same way as you are. And so, I do think there's going to be some amount of, fog of war sort of things going on. That said, I can certainly say from a Western point of view in America, there has been a lack of attention to what recent events mean and what is going to come from them. I have no reason to doubt the reports that I've read about various problems with the Hasina government and various things that people have criticized her for. Some of them sound very legitimate to me. Having said that, the complete lack of focus in the West about what was going on and who was behind some of the forces opposing her that were at least as bad as the abuses they were complaining about is deeply concerning. There was all this talk about, how students were the ones protesting and students were the one pushing her out. And well, it doesn't require that much knowledge to know back, in 2013, 2014, during that election period, it was Jamaat-e-Islami's student wing that was one of the most violent non-state actors in the entire world. And they were razing Hindu villages. They were harassing Christians. They were, attacking Muslims that did not agree with them. This is not an organization that you want being in charge of pushing back against, a problematic government. They are at least as bad, if not worse. I would probably say worse. And now that might not represent the sum total, but that is a significant part of what's going on there. And I think what you've seen is some people try to take control of the situation. But, Mohammed Yunus, I have no particularly, harsh opinion of him. He seems to be a decent man from what I know. However, the idea that a bunch of students, a fair amount of collection of him, were Jamaat-e-Islami supporters are really represented by this guy or really fighting for him, in my opinion, is nonsense. Is what this really appears to be to me is to sort of put a nice face on a situation where we know very little really about who is controlling things behind the scenes. And frankly, I'd be a little shocked if he really had the power to do much. And so I think there needs to be a lot more looking into, what role are radical influences on the Bangladeshi military, the Bangladeshi police and security services, and the government at large, who's really in control. It's not about Mohammed Yunus being a bad man. It's about, he just kind of stumbled into this, and there's a lot more forces at work that certainly from the Western perspective are not getting looked at. The Indian, media has done a little bit of looking at this, and, to their credit, but I think the world does not realize how difficult this situation is, and will likely continue to be if things don't change.
Which is why, Clifford, I'd like to ask you this. Now, a lot of people say that, the Indian media is looking at things from the wrong perspective. that Professor Yunus is doing all that he can, and which is quite true. And it is also quite true that Hasina government, at least in the last 2 terms, had become certainly quite autocratic. Some of the ways in which he was governing certainly were not true to being a democratic leader. Having said that, if you consider Jamaat-e-Islami's ban a political decision by Sheikh Hasina and the Awami League, why has Professor Yunus and the interim government not waited to see exactly what the cases are or what the merits were of the case for the ban and lifted the ban so quickly after? Why now? Why so? Why in this manner? What's your reading?
Exactly what I'm alluding to, really, is that I don't think he's really in control of what's going on, or at least he has minimal control of what's going on. We can discuss the merits or lack thereof of, bans or unbans or whatever all day long. The fact remains that Jamaat-e-Islami was one of the purveyors of the Bengali genocide of 1971. The fact remains that they were one of the most violent groups in the 2014 election and have remained a significant security threat to South Asia and Bangladesh specifically. And, there may be reasons to ban them or not ban them, but it doesn't really make a lot of sense to me for this to be, priority one, unless there's something else driving things, which is pretty clear to me what's going on. And this is not necessarily to say that everybody that was protesting the government was, on their side. It is to say power abhors a vacuum. And if there is a power vacuum, they're perfectly willing to fill it. And it seems to me very likely that is a significant part of what's going on.
Ban or not, the political vacuum that you speak of, Clifford, was filled during the protests because the students' body came out, Jamaat supporters came out, Jamaat followers and members did come out, irrespective of the ban, and mobilized their people, took advantage of that vacuum, and now you can't see their presence.
Yeah, and frankly, you've seen things like this before. I would point to the Islamic Revolution in Iran in 1979 as being, having certain similarities to this. You had a somewhat autocratic government, that was, and a revolution that had many sides to it, some of which were democratic and many of which were not. And of course, it was the least democratic forces that wound up on top of that pile. I hope that doesn't happen in Bangladesh. I fear that it could. And I certainly think that there are forces trying to make that the case. Speaking of Iran, Iran came out with a statement almost immediately after the fall of Sheikh Hasina, basically giving sympathy to the protesters and, those who have died, and painting itself on the side of Muslims more broadly, ignoring, I believe, Bangladesh is something like 2-3% Shia, so it was clearly, in my view, trying to play a role on behalf of the Islamist protesters in Bangladesh. And in my view, if you look at Iran's record across the world, that's deeply problematic for regional stability and, frankly, for the security of the world.
Right. But the other important piece of information and news that came out was the fact that Jashimuddin Rahmani, who is the chief of the Islamist outfit Ansarullah Bangla team, was released. What was the need for that now? I mean, if you're looking at law and order situation, free and fair elections, conducting of the election sooner than later, why are you taking these decisions at this point in time? What is the messaging over here? We do know that he worked against and they are all anti-India. The security situation for India is going to be quite concerning at the border and otherwise too. We will talk about Bangladesh, BNP, and now Yunus, the interim government's connections, contacts, and recent engagements with Pakistan. That aside, firstly, why release terrorists at this point in time?
Yeah, I mean, again, I would suggest that at minimum, it's showing that the more Islamist forces, the sort of the anti-democratic forces, a different sort of anti-democratic force, has disproportionate power in this situation. possibly because they helped instigate it. I'm quite certain they at least helped instigate it. How much of an impact is a little bit more tricky, but that at minimum, they have since gained the upper hand. And I think certainly India and others actors, I would hope the US would need to start getting a handle on this. I can say from reading the US press, um, there is a lack of understanding about the potential challenges. It's almost all being painted in terms of Sheikh Hasina's abuses, real or perceived, and very little at the potential fallout. It's not being not discussed at all. There is some discussion, but it seems to be an afterthought. In my view, it should be the first order of business is realizing, oh, wait, whatever problems came before, we're faced with a very serious challenge now. We need to make sure that, I mean, I'm hardly a person to come up with this, but, the Bangladesh doesn't become another Afghanistan, or even if not another Afghanistan, another Pakistan in terms of how they conduct themselves. And I don't think that's in anybody's real best interest for Bangladesh to become, less economically successful and more militant. Yet there's a very real possibility for that to happen. Hope not, but there's certainly the handwriting on the wall that that's a real possibility, and I think that needs to be taken a lot more seriously by the international community, for lack of a better word.
But that's another very interesting question over here. We see America and India work together on so many counts, but it's on Bangladesh that they differed completely. The fact that America did not understand the importance of Sheikh Hasina for India, the security that Sheikh Hasina's government was providing to India, ensuring these radical forces were behind either bars or contained. The Jamaat-e-Islami was not being given political space under Awami League. Yet America was okay because Sheikh Hasina was not going the way America wanted. America was okay engaging the other side, the other party, although they are friends with the Pak ISI, they are very close to the radical fundamentalists. And look what has happened in Bangladesh today. We might not have Sheikh Hasina, but we have more radical elements in the streets of Bangladesh than ever before. Concerns for India that America completely ignored.
Yeah, no, America, I say only half jokingly, quite frequently, that to many Americans, Bangladesh is a concert that George Harrison put on, 50 years ago, and Kashmir is a kind of a sweater. There's a complete lack of understanding about the security needs of India and just sort of the regional politics by the general public. Moreover, the people that do know this area of the world only know parts of it, and there's things they miss. There's a big debate going on in America. I mean, it has been for quite some time, really, but sort of on how to deal with Islamist movements. There's a general understanding that certain Islamist movements are a problem, but there's a big debate. Some people view all Muslims as Islamist and basically to think them all beyond the pale. Other ones think that, all Muslims are Islamists and think that's okay. There's a lack of understanding of the diversity of opinion and of practice in Islam. And so there's a lack of ability to um, engage with the Islamic world in what I would say is a realistic way. And that manifests itself a lot when you deal with countries like Bangladesh that has genuinely moderate, population in the Muslim community and ones that are not. And also, sadly, and this is something I've done a lot of work on myself, is there are many Muslims in America, most of which are perfectly normal citizens. But some of the best organized ones are like Jamaat-e-Islami's American chapter, the Islamic Circle of North America, and some of its branches and partners. They are not, your average typical Muslim, at least at the leadership level. And they work to influence these debates. They work to basically paint, any criticism of any Islamist movement as being anti-Muslim or xenophobic or something, and to really stop these kind of serious debates about what to do with the most problematic actors. And that's what they do. That's sort of their profession, and they're pretty good at it. They've at least made the issue polarizing, and I would argue kept people from having a lack of a realistic understanding of places like Bangladesh. and the challenges they present America and its friends.
Well, Clifford, the larger picture when it comes to terrorism, Jamaat-e-Islami, do you think it's more weakened right now, or do you see the strength that they've got? I ask you this is because you might not be on the ground, but you've been tracking, monitoring the situation in Bangladesh. The Bangladeshi government seems to be in denial of what's happening to the minorities in Bangladesh. They say that there are only isolated, quote unquote, instances and incidents. What's
Yeah,
your reading?
it's always hard to tell. There's always a fog of war situation going on where you're not quite sure. You're getting reports of all kinds of different things. And so, it's one of those things. You find one instance ends up being false, and you say that therefore every instance is false, which I think is itself false. The real issue here, in my view, is it would be naive to think that you would empower Jamaat-e-Islami and their various friends and associates and not see minorities targeted. Clearly, Hindus, Christians, minority Muslim sects, those kinds of people are going to face a tougher time in life should Jamaat-e-Islami and its ilk um, gain power, gain flexibility, or even gain a lack of a government trying to control them. I mean, that's just what they do. They've done it since their inception. That's their reason for existing. That's the reason why they were part of the Bengali genocide. That's why they have been, key to, founding Hizbul Mujahideen in Kashmir. I mean, that's why they do the bad things that they do. It would be naive to suspect that they wouldn't do such a thing inside of a power vacuum situation, which, as we've already discussed, is pretty clearly, in my view, what's going on here.
In your appreciation, Clifford, what do you think is the way forward in terms of how we are looking at Bangladesh today, and how can India really engage this interim government, the BNP, when we are looking at anti-India sentiments ride very high in Bangladesh, and they're already engaging Pakistan for weapons?
Yeah, I would, I think America and India and anybody that is sympathetic to a more democratic order should be doing whatever they can to lean on Bangladesh to um, protect minorities, to keep militia, student groups, kind of both at the same time in check, and basically just to let them know that merely because they are going to cite to us having legitimate grievances with the Hasiina government, that does not mean that everything goes in terms of what comes next, and that will have real world consequences if they don't. I mean, I don't think it is in America's or India's best interest to jump in the middle deeply of a situation that we have real control over. But to the degree we can control it, we should be sending the signal that, you know, you cannot just try to appease the most radical forces among you in order to try to buy stability. It's going to have real world consequences with your relationship with India, with the US, with other allies. And I think hopefully the people that understand some of these dynamics best in both India and the US and other allied countries can come to this conclusion. I'm not super hopeful about this, but I hope it can happen. And I do think if the people that know it best uh, explain it, maybe it has a chance of at least being a little bit more true than it otherwise would be.
Go to the Pakistan China question. There's one very important question over here because we're talking about radical Islamists, fundamentalists. What's the role of the military over here? Bangladeshi military, the Bangladeshi army, navy, air force. What's the kind of connect they have to the fundamentalists? Is there one? And how connected are they to Pakistan or China for that matter? That could
I
really
mean,
be a huge impediment for the West and for India.
I certainly think that, I mean, I have certainly seen reports to the effect of, the military was working very close with, the student protesters, particularly once Sheikh Hasina left. And again, I found it kind of almost funny how this was portrayed as something totally innocent. Um, the idea that a bunch of students are telling the military how to run the government, you know, that's not what's happening here. But that was the kind of reports I was seeing, which means there's somebody else telling the students what to ask for. There's somebody else influencing the military. You're not having a bunch of 19-year-olds, telling, dictating what's going on. It's very difficult to tell, what elements of the military are doing and why, and what pushback there is. Clearly, I mean, China has trying to gain influence in Bangladesh for decades. Pakistan certainly continues to play a hand there when it thinks it can get away with it. Um, it'd be very hard to comment at this point of exactly what they're doing. Um, but again, I think it would be naive to think they're not at least doing what they can um, to gain influence.
And finally, before I let you go, again, the Pak China question. Where do you think the Pakistan China connect now? And they are also trying to, in this vacuum, in this space that they've got with India out. That was the campaign, Clifford. What's the kind of space? What's the kind of engagement? Because we do see that if elections are held, BNP will certainly have an upper hand. They do have, they are seen very, very close to the establishment in Pakistan. And now we're looking at Yunus's interim government also engaging Pakistan with deals on weapons. So as early as this, even when the elections are not held, and we're looking at them having conversations. So where do you think all this is really headed? And you keep alluding to somebody. You keep alluding to somebody behind all this. Who that might be?
I don't want to say more than I know, because I do think there's a lot of fog of war stuff going on. All I can say is that BNP leaders, Jamaat-e-Islami leaders, other sort of Islamist groups are clearly trying to work this to their advantage. And so who those people are or what they're up to, again, with the very limited knowledge we have at this time, it's hard to say exactly who they are, exactly what they're doing. I mean, it's not hard to figure out that they're trying to do this. I mean, the fact that Jamaat-e-Islami was at the forefront of the protests is widely reported and quite obvious. The fact that what they have tried to do historically, again, is very obvious and very well documented. So the real question is, what did they think is in their best interest this time? Who is playing roles this time? That's a little bit harder to say in terms of exactly who and exactly what their game plan is at this point. I just think that given the fact that they clearly were a big part of this protest, given the fact that they clearly were, they have the track record they have of violent student militias, of being part of all kinds of radicalization efforts. Whatever they're up to probably is not in the best interest of the U.S. or India or many of our friends. And so I would hope that the intelligence service of India, of America, and our allies is trying to get a handle on exactly what they're up to, exactly who's playing a role, and adjusting policy accordingly.
And just my final question to you: a lot of experts have been saying that this is America also trying to now get a foot in the Bay of Bengal. This is the largest strategy. Do you think in all this, in this political turmoil, this change of power, even if they had a role to play, that they have certainly been dealt a very wrong hand over here? Because there is no access. If anything, we'll see more of Pakistan and China here.
I don't see this as being an American effort. I mean, if it is, I don't think it is. I don't even think it's plausible, frankly. And to the degree it even could be, it was obviously a wild miscalculation. The exact opposite is likely to happen. The more likely is that China and others that are less amenable to American interests are gaining more influence. I would like to think that that could be different. I mean, certainly I would hope for the best interests of my country in trade and security and things like that. But it certainly doesn't seem to be going that way to me, particularly in the short term. Long term, I don't know. There's a lot of things that can play out. I do think there are perfectly reasonable people that are part of this, but there have been personally reasonable people that were part of a lot of, revolutionary movements that got subsumed by the worst kinds. Again, I'd point to, the Islamic revolution in Iran. There were tons of people that wanted a more democratic Iran. They didn't get one. I fear that could happen here. It seems likely at this point to me.
Clifford Smith, thank you so much for joining us here on India Today Global. Thank you.
Thank you.